Hi, this is Nutta Feinstein with the edition of Hasidic Nurse's Notes. If anyone hasn't seen this before, I'm a registered nurse, state of Florida and New York, and I'm also trying to be a Hasidic Jew. So I'm not an expert in medicine, and I'm not a rabbi, but in my years of life and just perspective in both fields, of maybe there's something I can add to your own experiences. And so, welcome. Today is the the 6th day of May, and it's the 19th day of the month, the Hebrew month of Adar. I was initially going to start this presentation because of a blip I saw on the internet attributed to Albert Einstein, which I thought was noteworthy. I think all of you had experiences of seeing wisdom that's out in the world, and maybe you hadn't had it on your fingertips or on your lips, but when you heard it, you said, yes, this kind of consolidates my thinking or my experiences. And what he said, and it wasn't the real theory of physics and relativity, but he said in so many words, if you want to have an intelligent child, then you need to read him fairy tales. And if you want him to be more intelligent, you should read him more fairy tales. Now let's get serious. That makes a lot of sense because for a number of reasons. I didn't read the article in depth, but they hinted at developing imagination and creativity, I would think, and very dependent on ability to imagine. In the Hasidic world, we have stories as well, and not necessarily fairy tales, but stories of righteous people called tzaddikim and people who weren't, but they had tremendous experiences. And one of the rabbis I heard say at one time that you can have all the laws read to you and all the philosophy read to you, but what's going to put it into a usable package is oftentimes a story. So give credit to Mr. Feinstein, uh, Dr. Feinstein, for making this presentation. Among the imagination points that I would say that you're trained also in our philosophy, there is a we call wisdom or intellect, smarts, and there's a lot of terms for it in general. But we make specific use of the some terms with the English, and one is called wisdom. Again, this is our use of the terms. Wisdom is when you have that thought, that germinating thought, that spark of, hey, this really means something for me. It could mean something for me. That's that splash, that flash of thought, wisdom. But we learned that you have to hold on to it because if you get distracted, you may even lose it. Like, what was I thinking about? How could I not remember that? So there's another step, which we call intellect, Bina in Hebrew. And that's where you develop that thought. You grab a hold of it, think about it, and conjure up different uses of it. And it starts to repetition to become part of your thinking. And it's much less likely you lose it. And not only that, you could expand upon it and see how it's usable in other forms or other ways applied to how you need it. So that's the second step. Again, we're very intellectual, not necessarily uh, imagination. I'm not ruling that out, but I just want to say it's not absolute that with imagination. And finally, another step in that intellectual process called das, or dot, which is taking that idea and making it usable, making it have an effect on your environment, your world, your thinking. You actually not thinking, you're in your action. So there's this three stage. You get that inception of thought, you develop it, and then you figure out how to use it and proceed that way. So getting back to the stories, I just wanted to mention that about imagination and intellect. Now, with the back to the story itself, the child having a bedtime story, um, it's I don't know if it has to be bedtime, but parent reading a story, fairy tale as he presents it. And again, it doesn't have to be fairy tale; it could be real life. But to give a child to think about it, imagine, and not only that, that it's a chance for the child to focus. There's a lot of extractions, a lot of input, and here's a chance to have something presented to him, not just to read it alone. An adult, a parent, caring person, read it to him, and therefore he can kind of rule out some distractions in life and focus on something that could have some meaning. Not that the distraction wouldn't have meaning either, but at least one distraction that you can use. And on top of that, again, I'm not reading from the article. I'm just kind of extrapolating for myself. I'm a parent. I had young children, and sometimes I would become intimidated because I thought they were learning more in school than I had learned. I didn't grow up religious, and here they were starting at a young age. Well, a lot of the terminologies and concepts which I hadn't had, and I was trying to catch up. And I mean, realized that just the fact, not that I didn't, but just the fact that a parent could be and the child could be together and touching, holding an arm, that warmth, the softness, maybe the endorphins, like you were technical, to be a positive experience for the child and desire to be with the parent. And on top of it, um, there's a bonding that a child could say, "Oh, now I have a chance. I'm going to have a chance to speak to my mother or my father, someone close to me. I had something on my mind. Maybe it was even related to what you read, the story. I have a question on that story. It's confusing me, or it makes me think about something, or reminds me of something." So a child has a chance to ask a question based on what you read to them. And with that door open, he may have time to think, by the way, something happened to me a couple of days ago, or something I was wondering about, or something happened today, or I'm concerned about the future. So the sitting down with a child, reading that story, whichever one it might be, seems to have a multifold advantage. And I appreciate that seeing that article and being able to relate it in a way that perhaps will be helpful as a parent. I'll just backtrack from a moment and do what I call the morning meeting as why we're here. We're here because we want to explore and get closer to God and creator of the world, who creates the world, and to the Torah, we're able to learn His ways and develop our relationship with Him. So that's number one. And with that in mind, then we come to the point where Ein od milvado, there's nothing but God. Nothing's outside of God. Quite a concept. And if a person delves into it again, the imagination will help because some things become almost staggering to the imagination, but not unreasonable necessarily. And then going from there, that Kol b'yedei Shamayim, everything is from the hand of heaven, which really opens up another door. But the one thing that's attached to that, because a person might say God's everything, He's aware of everything, and everything comes from Him. So what about me? Where am I in this picture? To reiterate what I've said before, that God left the world not perfect, and He gave man a chance to have a partnership with Him, close relationship as a partner, to continue to perfect the world, so godliness can be revealed to all mankind, especially with the final redemption, Revelation of Mashiach. So that's the morning meeting where we're at. We're hopefully going to go. So another story. Oh, by the way, um, as far as imagination and stories, I grew up as a Jew, but not a religious Jew. I went to public school in K to 12, as they call it now, university and graduate school. And during these times, unless you took a philosophy course, which I tried once, but I picked the wrong one, that philosophy kind of is absent in the public education, especially the early years when children really need a chance to think about things and find out values and ethics, morals. Presenting, give me the thing is that once in a while, something slips in. One of my teachers was a science teacher. Eighth grade was laying down the law at the beginning of the school year and saying about how we have to behave ourselves. And he's in many ways knowing how we're behaving ourselves, even though we don't think so. And he said to cap it off, and the word to the wise is sufficient. And I didn't know exactly what that meant, but gave me something to think about. And it's a fantastic statement. On top of that, I don't know how I found the story. It was a story pamphlet, wasn't part of the actual books of the curriculum, but it told the story of a man who was walking in the winter outside on a path and showed up in his vision. I don't know if it was directly in front of him or on the side, a snake that was frozen. It was bitter cold. The snake was frozen solid. He moved it around, it was frozen. But he brought it back to his home and put it near the fireplace, not directly, for a slow thaw. And lo and behold, the snake recovered. And the man figured, well, I have a little companion here. And I don't know if he was totally alone, but he figured he'd get a little appreciation from the snake for saving his life. So he went over to pet the snake or to hold the snake. And the snake bit him. And he recoiled. And the end of the story, the summation was there's no gratitude from the wicked. So therefore, one has to be careful not to give abundant kindness indiscriminately because it may lead to a negative result. So these are my two bouts of philosophy in the public school. Needless to say, the religion, Judaism, Torah delves into subjects like that in much greater depth, and noteworthy is that children get at a younger age that there are values and conduct and decision making. One I heard more recently, or saw recently, because of a rabbi who was also a science professor at a university, so he was knowledgeable in Judaism and especially sciences. Actually, he grew up in the sciences himself and later became religious. He's really brilliant, and he introduced the class to help explain what he was saying to quantum physics, some principles of it. And even though I went through graduate and undergraduate in sciences, physics and chemistry and math, I didn't really hear too much about quantum physics. So here I get it in the Torah class. And in reading it, there's a presentation from famous nuclear physics scientist named Niels Bohr, who was attributed to saying that the model of the atom, as we know it, was like a nucleus in the center and subatomic particles, atoms, protons, neutrons circulating around it. It's a very famous, presentation, visual. He says not accurate. And I believe it was because the mass of the nucleus, the center body, was so great compared to the other ones that its gravity would rapidly pull them two down into the mass. That has implications. Also, I just want to mention that if I use a scientific example, I'm number one, not a scientist, so I can't tell you that I'm totally accurate. Number two is that science um, has to come back on itself sometimes. It doesn't cover all issues. I think the quantum physics demonstrates that the world of nature, which nature is, we believe, is a creation of God, that the world of nature, like Newtonian formulas and everything, don't always work with a subatomic world. But anyway, science is still useful. It works for most of our activities, So if I use an example, I'm not going to be pretend that I know all the ramifications of what I present, and I'm sure a person well versed will you say, well, what you presented is not really all inclusive, and that may be true. So I say to you, if I use a scientific example, hopefully it is an example and may help to illustrate what I'm trying to say on the religious plane. So going forth with, I explained this quantum physics. They had a thing which is on videos, on the media, where it's animated even, that told about a slit experiment. Again, I'm not making a science class, so I'm trying to use it for um, the religious implication, the Torah implications, is that with the slit experiment, they found that subatomic particles, I think electrons, did not behave as they would expect in certain situations. And they had no reason why, from everything they had done otherwise, to observe it. So they set up a device to uh, observe it, scientifically, electronically, I don't know. And when they put up that device, the behavior of the particle changed. And this has been repeated and verified and expanded that putting an observer, an observing device, can affect the normal activity of matter and energy. What we can learn from that is that man, occupied in mitzvahs, doing good deeds, we have to believe that he can make a difference in the world, change the world, alter the world, influence the world. So take confidence that you are here with abilities, talents. Some are recognized, some maybe need development, but you might know that, and you have to decide which ones are worth doing it with. But you have abilities God gave to you. No matter what you think, how they got to you, but you have them. And those abilities, as I'm trying to present, you are part of the creation, part of the influence that makes the world go around. So going forward with the things I've heard is that one was that the Rabbi Sachs, Jonathan Sachs, in England, he called it Oliver Sholem, he passed away. I recently saw a presentation where he was talking about anti-Semitism, and where anti-Semitism in reality is not an absolute thing. It's not just a Jewish problem. The whole world has suffered by the perpetrators of anti-Semitism. The countries where the totalitarian governments, evil governments, went after the Jews, many people, and probably even more, suffered as well and were killed as well. I don't think it takes much history to demonstrate that. So here he presents that information and put that on the side and say, what do we do with it? The next point I heard very recently was a young lady, I think Israeli, Jewish, doing a very concise, distinct history of the settlement of the Jewish people in the land of Israel, you know, from the time of the Romans and on. The Jews were there before the Romans. The Romans came in and took over with horrible results. Anyway, she described the timeline and how it really is Jewish land very clearly. So again, I say it makes sense, logic, historically valid, and on the table again. What are we going to do with that information? So it reminds me of a saying I heard some 50 years ago in a casual conversation, some friends, and that saying was, "Don't cloud the issue with the facts. All the facts in the world are not going to get necessarily from your table on a hotline to the presidents and prime ministers and the generals. So what are you going to do with them? You can tell your neighbors, maybe make a video, but what are we going to do with these facts? Are they making a difference? Is it the equivalent of a football game? The people who are probably listening to these facts already know them. And the people who aren't listening to them, where's it going? What's the fact? What are they listening to? So it comes to a point of like, is this futility? To try to answer this situation of what do we do from here, being futility, I'll relate something that happened to a very close acquaintance, I could say friend. This was a person who in business helped many, many people, had a great family, and he found himself in a legal situation which was, say, bleak at minimum. Not even to describe the situation he was in. He recounted his experience, and part of it, he said that it came to a point where all his appeals and all activities which were in his favor didn't work, and he was looking at a very unpleasant future. But then he said to himself that at this point, now I can say I've exhausted all the natural forms of assistance, and I'm totally dependent on God's hands. I guess in a way, I mean, it sounds bleak, but it's a relief because I've tried everything and racked my brains, following advice and going down dead ends, blind alleys. Now I just relate directly to God. And thank God, within a very short time, he was released and back to his family and back to life in the world. So that brings me to say that things are bleak. It seems impossible to deal with. Then maybe you have to look at the stadium you're in and get in the right stadium. I mean, you can't play baseball in a basketball court. So what can we do to like take a look and assess, and maybe you'll say reboot, get us in the right stadium. I was a nurse in many years in the operating room, surgery. Many times surgeries were routine, many times they weren't. And part of what's being routine or is, or let's say, easy to work with. Sometimes it's not just the case, it's the people you're working with. Who's the leader? Who's your teammates? What are the resources? Um, so many things can add to pressure and stress in surgery, not just the nature of the case. Nevertheless, when things get hectic, and sometimes you, I don't say blank out, you just sort of like, what do I do first? And I heard one doctor say a person with a system is an intelligent person. So you develop a system, not speak for myself, but you have to develop a system to fall back on at times where it's hard to put everything together. For that system, I had a little saying called SMAGAs, which was suction, monitoring equipment, cardiac monitoring, blood pressure, whatever, anesthesia equipment, the one I'm responsible for to have available for the anesthesiologist, grounding equipment, that's the G, that's for stopping the bleeding, intravenous solutions available and equipment for the anesthesia. And if I was starting it myself, to do that, was usually always at an IV in surgery, and solutions like saline, irrigation, cleaning solutions, which, um, so if I had those things in the room, I knew a case could get started and I wouldn't be blindsided. And without them, it would be difficult to do it. So that was my first line of thinking. So what do we do first line of thinking if things get tough and looks like the natural ways of handling are not going to work? Is maybe say to yourself, and I don't mean these words with validity, is blame God first. Wow. Only to get you in the ballpark, to get you in the baseball stadium. Blame God first. Otherwise, if you start looking at the United Nations, you start looking at um, media, you start looking at politics, and thinking that they're going to handle everything, which God willing they could or they would, but make sure you get God in you're in a God stadium. Okay, not to blame them really, but to get you into that frame of reference. And then from there, then you say, how is it possible? Well, if God runs the world, that this happened? Once we start thinking like this, then we can do something called a cheshbon nefesh, as an accounting of yourself. What have I done? I mean, is it possible that I got off the track? Is related to me directly, or we're all brothers, and so anything one does is related to another person. So have I done anything that could have, caused this to happen? And is there something I can do to reverse it? So what does God want? What would he want? Or what did he want from me? Or what would he want from me now? Going further, how can I help? I'm just one person. So here we come into a couple concepts of Judaism. One is simply said cause and effect. That if I do this, this will happen. Well, it means really that you get such a response, but you still have to try it. It says in the Torah, if you follow my commandments, that you'll have good crops, plentiful crops. And if you do this, you'll have this. So God gives us, He teaches us that this exists. And that's called, a term called ishtalshelus, cause and effect. So dealing with the world situation, since you probably don't have a hotline to the prime minister or the president or to the media or United Nations. So that looks a little bit maybe unreachable. So we have another formula available, which is called Hishtadlus, is making us capable or creating an environment where God can intercede in the way he chooses. So it's not a direct cause and effect, But to demonstrate it more, I mentioned in the book Kirkayovus, Ethics of the Fathers, that there's one of the missions that says, make God's will your will. So he'll make his will, your will, his will. Excuse me, for the translation might not be exactly right. That's the concept. Okay, and it goes on even further, which gets a little more abstract, but even more inclusive. And that statement is negate your will, hold back on your will so that God can what? That he will cause the will of others to be held back in deference to your will taking the priority. So you can extrapolate that and say, if I just negate my will for God's will, then he'll negate the will of others. And that has broad implications. So going further, so talking about action, what do we do? So you can't be a spectator. You have to go to be a player. So just do something. There are no boundaries to what you can do. Remember, I mentioned in Noachite, most of Noachites are laws are negative, not something you should do. Mostly are things you shouldn't do, and some really have ramifications in the world, like the murder and steal, not to do these, and pure, family intimate relationships. But you don't have really a hands-on control of anything, except courts of justice, which can be extrapolated into making peace in mankind. And following that concept, the thing which I related, but I heard while I was working in a free food pantry. I was in the Midwest after there was a disaster of sorts, and multiple institutions, including the churches, participated. Actually, I participated as a hospital employee rather than a Jewish representative. And by the way, I'm not representing any Jewish organizations. I make these presentations. I'm not employed by any, and I've been appointed. So going further, that a man who was a lay member of the Catholic Church said that the sister had told him, the sister in charge, that desperate people do desperate things. So we can take that, let's learn from everybody, and find a way to make it that people aren't desperate. For example, I have a relative who was a district attorney for a number of years, and I asked him about how to implement the Noahide. He said, "I'll tell you, in my position, I recognize that so many people try to get out of jury duty." And he said, "This is a foundation of the American legal system, unique to most any of the countries in the world, where you pick a jury of peers to judge a person's guilty or not guilty, rather than just one judge or some other legal body." And he said, and people try to get out of jury duty, but you need intelligent, caring people to be in jury duty. Imagine someone is going to be on trial, and he sees that anybody he thinks is going to understand what he's talking about is not in the room. So this is a set aside your will for God's will, for this man's will, and do what you can to participate in jury duty. This was my son's suggestion. Also, the famous statement, just saying no to drugs. Well, what does that take? What do we have to do for our children, teach our children, whether in the schools or in the family, that can negate that desire, even though they know it's destructive for the use of drugs, and find them an alternative to replace what that need may be for going in that direction, maybe for relief of pain, mental or physical. So healthcare, legal, consumer protection, aid to the poor. There's a story about King David, and it's called Medrash. He went to God and said, "Why are there so many poor people in the world? Why can't there be more rich?" So God said to him, in the version I heard, "Well, where are the rich? The rich are only rich because I made them rich in order to help the poor. And if they're not using the resources I've given them, then I have to reevaluate whether they should be getting it at all." So we can't wait for the government. We want the government, support the government, but we have to try to help people who need help before it has to be legislated. And when it's legislated, there's loopholes. Hopefully not all, every agency can get down to the grassroots. So maybe you belong to an organization that does a charitable work, or you need someone in need, know someone in need. We teach that when you help someone through charity, the money's not lost; it will come back to you. So be proactive. Proactive. This is what God wants. That He wants us a world where He can dwell. Final point is uh, Jewish Noachide relationship is that there are many Jews out there trying to incorporate, develop Noachide, and perhaps you're not finding enough of them. So I'm telling you that we don't have the mass central agency controlling all the Jews in the secular world, in the worldly matters in the world. And we don't have, outreach organizations for people who aren't Jewish the way other people do, especially with the motive of conversion. We don't try to force conversion, but we encourage Noachite, and conversion is available when a person wants it. So have a little patience with the Jews. In the meantime, make yourselves noteworthy. Yes, the Jews are a light to the nations. I use the analogy of a truck. It can be more refined, maybe to a limousine or a sports car, but a vehicle needs light to get through the darkness. But the light needs the vehicle to justify its existence, to illuminate and guide. So in the meantime, make yourself a vehicle. And we Jews are working on ourselves to place the light right in where they're supposed to be. God bless you all, and hope to speak with you then. Shiach now.